Hi there, Alexei here. Today's topic will be very straightforward, very specific, and I would say manageable. I will not digress as I tend to do sometimes. Instead, I'll focus on a single artwork, which we will explore. Now, you might ask, is it worth it? Is it worth spending time on a specific and not very famous piece? In my opinion, it is. First, the piece itself is magnificent, despite the fact that we do not know exactly who created it. It is located in Munich now, and it looks like this. It's a late Gothic altar, which strikes me personally with its angularity, a sort of crystalline manner. Look at the distinctive canopies that crown the figures, and the way the clothing and bodies of the four depicted people are rendered all remind me of smooth and solid and shimmering crystal surface. It's very beautiful and very, very unusual. Moreover, the people depicted here are no ordinary figures. They are commonly known as the Western Church Fathers. Now, as you understand, the Eastern and the Western churches, which is to say their Orthodox and Catholic churches, often venerate common saints, but each also has its particularly revered figures. And the four individuals presented on this altar are considered pillars of Catholic doctrine. And since we are art lovers, you and I, it would be beneficial for us to know how they're typically depicted. So, let's take a look at them. Okay, the first on the left is Saint Jerome. And Saint Jerome is mostly remembered as the translator of the Bible into Latin. Now, before him, the Old Testament existed in ancient Hebrew, and the New Testament correspondingly in Greek, two languages that medieval Europe had nearly forgotten. And throughout the Middle Ages, European priests, European intellectuals, they all used what is called the Vulgate. That is, the Latin translation made by Jerome himself. Now, that was a tremendous effort on his part, though admittedly a few errors did creep in. And I constantly remind you about one of them, the horns of Moses. Now, Jerome is easy to recognize. He is always accompanied by the lion. Well, actually, various saints can be seen in the company of a lion. For example, the prophet Daniel, who was thrown into the lion's den. But Saint Jerome's lion is a friendly one. It is his pet. Now, legend has it that when Saint Jerome was a hermit in the desert, a lion came to him with a thorn or a splinter in his paw. So the saint removed it, and of course, after that, the lion became his best friend. Now, I especially love this story for a personal reason. You see, I'm not very funny. My whole life, I tended to be more on the nerdy end of human spectrum, so to speak. But once, when in Frankfurt, I saw a painting of Saint Jerome with his lion, which inspired me to create my first meme. Well, my first and the last meme, that is, but I'm still proud of it. So, I'm going to show it to you now. Brace yourself. Prepare to bask in rays of my creativity. Ready? Okay, here it goes. So, yeah. Anyway, the next character is also easy to recognize. It's Saint Augustine. Now, Saint Augustine, let me remind you, lived in the 5th century AD in North Africa. A man is known for his incredible, unbelievable productivity. He managed to write more than some people managed to read in their entire lifetime. Augustine commented on virtually every theological issue of his time and is rightfully considered one of the pillars of Catholic Church. Now, how do we usually recognize him? Well, there are several traditional attributes of Saint Augustine. Sometimes he is depicted holding a flaming heart, but more often he is shown in a company of a small child, and that child is holding a spoon. Now, what is this all about? Well, the legend has it that once St. Augustine was just walking along the seashore, pondering the mystery of the Holy Trinity. Indeed, one of the most complex, one of the most elusive Christian dogmas. God is one, but nonetheless, he exists as three distinct personalities. They are absolutely equal in terms of their power, capabilities, seniority, but at the same time, they are absolutely distinct from one another. How can this be? Well, it doesn't fit into a human head, and even into such head as St. Augustine's. So, once he was strolling and pondering, and suddenly he saw a small child who has dug a small hole and was spooning water from the sea into that hole. "What are you doing, child?" asked Augustine. "Well, I'm trying to pour the sea into this hole," was the answer. "But that's impossible, child," smiled Augustine, to which he was surprised to hear in response, "It is more likely for me to achieve my task than for you to solve the mystery of the Trinity with your human mind." After which Augustine realized that it was a vision from above and stopped thinking about those matters not meant to be comprehended by mortals. Okay, we will skip the next character for now because he is the most interesting one and we'll save him for later. First, let me tell you about the person on the far right. This is Saint Ambroise of Milan, a bishop of Milan, that is, and he was known both as a preacher and as a politician. And by the way, as the teacher of the very same Saint Augustine. Now, in Milan there is a large church known as the Basilica of Ambroise, and I've been to Milan actually, and I wanted to visit it but couldn't get in because the tickets were sold out. However, I did find a free parking there. Can you believe it? A free parking in Italy, and it was 2023, so it wasn't all loss. But back to our topic. Ambroise of Milan is also depicted with a child, but in this case the child is in a cradle. And I must admit, I have some doubts as to how to interpret it. The thing is, there are two episodes in his biography, and they both might explain the presence of this infant. The first episode concerns Ambroise's own childhood. It is told that when he was very small and had been left in a cradle outside, his father returned after some time and approached his son, and with great surprise and no small fear, he saw that bees were swarming around the child. But coming closer, he was even more astonished to see that they were not stinging him. Instead, they were making honeycombs in his mouth, and the infant's mouth was smeared with honey. Thus, the father understood that his son was destined for a great future as a writer and orator and a speaker. And indeed, Ambroise of Milan became famous for his sermons. And by the way, another famous artist, that is Jordaens, a contemporary of Rubens, depicts him with a beehive as his attribute. He has a painting on the same subject, the Four Church Fathers. And here is what it looks like. As you can see, Ambroise of Milan, and he is one on the far right, and has next to him a little angel holding a beehive. But there is another story in the biography of Ambroise of Milan which might explain the presence of this infant. Now, when Ambroise was striving for the position of Bishop of Milan, there were kind of elections. And suddenly, during those proceedings in the church, a child's voice was heard proclaiming, "Choose Ambroise." And thus everyone understood that it was a sign from above that God himself wished for Ambroise to assume the episcopal post. So, returning to our painting, why is the infant in a cradle? I think it's more likely a reminder of the first episode with the bees. But on the other hand, where are the bees then? It's unclear. So it might be a reference to the second episode. But in any case, there is no doubt that this is indeed Ambroise of Milan, because he is always included among the 4 Western fathers. And finally, the most interesting part. To the left of Ambroise, there is a man near whom a peculiar portal to hell opens. And it's not a figure of speech, it is a legitimate hell portal, from which obviously a sinner condemned to hellish torments is peering out, making gestures from below towards the saint. And notice that the sinner has something on his head. Now, if you are of roughly the same age as me, which is 40, sad, but so if you like scary movies as much as I did as a kid, then the name must be already hovering at the back of your mind somewhere. So get it in your head, it's Pinhead from Hellraiser. Now, if you don't know who that is, I strongly suggest not Googling, because I want no responsibility for psychological trauma that might ensue. In any case, no, that is not him, that is not Pinhead. For those are not pins in his head, that's a crown, which immediately identifies the story for us. The saint depicted here is Pope Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great. And he was a pope for only 14 years, if I'm not mistaken, from 590 to 604. And I must say, it was difficult to choose a worse time to become pope. By that time, the Western Roman Empire was in shambles. The Eastern Roman Empire, that is Byzantine, was not doing very well. Barbarians roamed Italy. So overall, looking at all this, Gregory I reasonably believed that the end of the world was near. And he actively prepared himself and his flock for the end of time. So, the end of the world, as you know, did not happen. But numerous works by Gregory remained, which are considered a real milestone in the development of Catholic thought. Also, he is often encountered in visual art. Now, how can you recognize him? Well, first of all, by the dove. Very often, a dove sits on his shoulder. On this particular altar, doves accompany all 4. See, there's a white dove descends upon each of them. Well, the dove is a symbol of the Holy Spirit, obviously, but still, for the other 3, the dove is not a standard symbol, whereas for Gregory it is, because there exists a legend, according to which Gregory used to dictate his writings from behind the curtain. And his scribe was always to stay on the other side of the curtain. And Gregory dictated very quickly, producing complete paragraphs, as if dictated by some invisible force. Now the scribe was curious, so one day the scribe gathered his courage and peeked behind the curtain. And he saw that at the moment the Holy Spirit, in the form of a dove, was dictating into the Pope's ear. And the Pope, in turn, was simply reciting to his scribe. That is why he is often depicted with a dove. Now, another popular story is the so-called Mass of Saint Gregory. According to legend, during a Mass, Christ himself unexpectedly appeared on the altar surrounded by the instruments of the Passions, right where the consecrated host, i.e. Christ's body, were placed. And this is usually how it is depicted. But the episode with the portal opening into hell is a rather rare occurrence in visual arts. That's precisely why I wanted to tell you about this unusual altar. So, there are several medieval texts with varying details that more or less tell the same story. The story of how Saint Gregory managed to extract not from hell, but from purgatory, the soul of the Roman Emperor Trajan. Now, Trajan, just to jot your memory, ruled at the beginning of the 2nd century AD and is remembered in Roman history as the best emperor, Principus Optimus. And he indeed led successful wars, the economy thrived under him, and most importantly, he ended another round of civil war. And he was not known for any of the, let's say, disturbing inclinations that Nero or Caligula had. So everything ran smoothly, and he was the best emperor. And the earliest text narrating the interactions of this emperor with the Saint Gregory merely tells that Saint Gregory once was walking through Rome and saw Trajan's column. And as you probably know, in Rome there exists Trajan's column, which depicts the exploits of his troops. And struck by this magnificent monument of antiquity, Gregory shed a few tears in memory of the emperor. Then he went on explaining that a ruler who has created such marvelous edifice was in hell for sure, because he was a pagan, so there was no alternative for him. In this earliest version, there is nothing is said about extracting his soul from hell. But in later versions, this motive appears. Saint Gregory begins to pray for the emperor's soul, and he prays day and night, and after some time receives a vision. Trajan himself appears to him and says that thanks to the prayers of the Pope, mercy has been granted to him, and his torments have been lessened. Actually, I first read this story in a fundamentally important book known as The Birth of Purgatory. And as you probably know, Catholics have the concept of purgatory, a third place, so to speak, besides heaven and hell. Now, Orthodox Christians do not have this concept. However, most Christians, as I have noticed, have a vague knowledge of those nuanced differences in dogmas. So a while ago, while living in Russia, I actually made a small course, just 5 lectures in it, on the topic of what's the difference between Catholic and Orthodox teaching. And it was reasonably successful. So I'm mentioning it now because this story of Emperor Trajan is very important for shaping the concept of purgatory. So essentially, the idea of purgatory involves it being a place similar to hell, where there are also torments and fire and all that good stuff, but those torments are temporary. They are not designed as the eternal punishment, but rather serve the purpose of purification of the soul. And living people, through their prayers, can shorten the time spent in purgatory. They can alleviate the fate of those who are there, much like Pope Gregory I did. So that's essentially all the content of today's lecture. No far-fetched conclusions, just a few intriguing iconographic details. So fortunately, I know that I have gathered people who like to learn about precisely such things. If I'm right, if you are indeed one of those who enjoy it, then likes, thankful comments, and of course, most importantly, don't miss my next videos, which come out every Tuesday. So I will see you next week.